After Vietnam was unified by the invasion from the north, South Vietnamese flags were taken down, and so was the name of Saigon, as it was soon changed to Ho Chi Minh City. For without Ho, a communist Vietnam may have never existed. Many southern Vietnamese felt the pressure of being suddenly occupied by a militaristic north. Private businesses were seized by the government and farms were put into badly run, state-controlled co-ops, while many Vietnamese from the north were relocated into the south to help balance control and also occupy the land and housing of southern Vietnamese. They either migrated into the Annam Mountains, were forced into re-education camps, or attempted to flee Vietnam either by boat or through the Cambodian jungle. Vietnam's unification was not a simple process, and internal relations only suffered more. Over 1 million South Vietnamese attempted to escape the country after the fall of Saigon. Some tried to escape into friendly Thailand through Cambodia, and many of them encountered landmines left behind from decades of war, or ran into members of the anti-Vietnamese Khmer Rouge, who often killed, robbed, or raped those trying to make it across the border. Others who escaped through the sea came to be known as the Vietnamese boat people. These people had small wooden boats, some not much bigger than a dinghy. These boats were typically small fishing vessels never designed to be seafaring. It is believed that up to 400,000 Vietnamese boat people fell victim to starvation, dehydration, and the harassment of Thai pirates. Those who were able to survive made it to Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, the Philippines, Hong Kong, and some even made it as far as Australia. Muslim countries like Malaysia and Indonesia often rejected the large number of refugees who landed on their shores, but Western powers promised nations like Indonesia that they would establish refugee camps for the boat people. The UN established several refugee camps throughout Southeast Asia. Many lived in these camps for several years, and some resided in them for nearly 2 decades. From the 70s through the 90s, many left these camps to immigrate to Western countries such as the United States, France, Australia, and Canada. More Vietnamese immigrated to the U.S. following an agreement between the United States and Vietnam allowing Vietnamese citizens to freely leave the country. Today, Vietnamese Americans number 2.2 million people, making up about 0.7% of the U.S. population, which doesn't seem like a lot, but that's about the same amount of people living in both Dakotas and Wyoming combined. This is also a very large number considering that the number of Vietnamese people living in the US in 1950 was believed to be less than 500 people. 60 years later, that number turned into 1.5 million in 2010. Many of the Vietnamese who stayed in the country were moved into re-education camps. These camps were designed to reteach political ideologies to Vietnamese who supported the South Vietnam government. They were often forced to work in these camps to help industrialize Vietnam. Because when has the rapid industrialization of a communist country ever had a negative consequence? While communism was uniting in Vietnam, it saw a split in other places in the world. During the late 50s and 60s, relations between China and the Soviet began to divide. Soviets' concept of Marxism began to evolve, especially after the death of Stalin in 1953, and the Soviets' policy in the Eastern Bloc. Maoism also took a different approach in China. Most communist countries sided on the side of the Soviet Union, while China focused on their own self-interest. South Vietnam favored the Soviet Union, and like most communist nations, their relationship with China dwindled. Vietnam was embargoed by many nations of the West as a communist nation and traded with other communist nations. After the Soviet Sino split, Vietnam's options for trade became even more limited. Vietnam had created plans to industrialize the country and modernize its economy. Any support Vietnam had was through the Soviet Union, and Vietnam could only trade with nations in Comecon. Vietnam also experienced many food shortages in the 80s, leading to events just short of famine. With the Soviets focused on their diminishing power in Eastern Europe, Vietnam began following the actions taken by China to reform its market economy. During the Vietnam War, communists in Cambodia were supported by North Vietnam and formed Khmer Rouge. Khmer Rouge fought the U.S.-backed government of Cambodia led by Lon Nol, which became the Cambodian Civil War. As the Vietnam War was coming to an end, both sides in the Civil War were seeing less support from both the U.S. and North Vietnam. By 1975, Khmer Rouge had taken full control of Cambodia, and even though they were supported by North Vietnam during Vietnam's war with the U.S., Cambodia sided with China. Khmer Rouge developed a strong anti-Vietnam sentiment and ran more like a band of warlords than it did as a national military. Ethnic Vietnamese began to be persecuted in southeast Cambodia, and one army even marched past the border into the Vietnamese city of Ba Chuc, where they massacred over 3,000 Vietnamese citizens. Other attacks of Vietnamese border towns increased, and tensions heated between Vietnam and Cambodia. Vietnam launched an attack in 1977 into Cambodia and freed ethnic Vietnamese prisoners. China attempted to secure peace between the two nations, but Cambodia continued attacks on Vietnamese. By 1978, Vietnam had prepared for a mass invasion of Cambodia, and quickly defeated and exiled the government. Vietnam occupied Cambodia for nearly a decade, fighting non-communist guerrilla forces, facing economic sanctions from the West, and finding itself in a new conflict with China. The Vietnamese occupation of Cambodia wasn't the only factor that led to the conflict. Vietnam had also been criticized by China for the treatment of ethnic Chinese groups living in Vietnam, such as the Hmong. China claimed that they were aiming at teaching Vietnam a hard-deserved lesson. China shortly marched an army to occupy regions in North Vietnam. Vietnamese troops mobilized to the border as well. China never ordered a full-scale invasion, as they worried about Soviet interference, who had militarized their border with China following the invasion. Both sides lost thousands in the conflict, and due to low morale and tensions between the Soviets, China withdrew from northern Vietnam. China claimed to win as they believed that they had taught Vietnam a lesson. Vietnam claimed to win as they had forced the withdrawal of China. Small conflicts continued between Vietnam and China through the 1980s, with China even claiming control of the Spratly Islands after a small naval battle between both nations. The Spratly Islands are a group of islands east of South Vietnam. Vietnamese and Chinese relations improved in the next decade. Vietnam withdrew from Cambodia in 1989, releasing the fate of the nation's government into the hands of the United Nations. Cambodia's monarchy was returned to power under a constitution which still exists today. Vietnamese and Chinese relations also improved following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Vietnam and China both made a plan to build a highway between the two nations. Vietnam looked back on its previous years following unification with economic failures, internal and external wars, and the lack of a strong trade and resources. Vietnam continued its reinvention of a more socialist-style economy in the 90s. Relations with the United States also improved, and the embargo was lifted in 1994. Since Vietnam's economy was limited to trade with the Soviets and Soviet allies, the end of the Cold War left Vietnam's markets wide open for Western trade. American businesses flooded the Vietnamese markets and quickly boosted the nation's economy. Since Vietnam's economy had suffered so much in the 20th century, it became a cheap tourist destination. Many traveled to Vietnam to see many of their mountains, caves, jungles, and deep history. Maybe some go for a taste of the Vietnamese soup pho. With close economic ties to the U.S. and its proximity to China, Vietnam has become a valuable position for Western allies. Vietnam may even become a victim of American imperialism seen in other countries where their own economy relies too much on American business. Vietnam is currently home to more than 98 million people and is assumed to reach over 100 million within the next decade. Vietnam still deals with many issues resulting from its 20th century crisis. Many of these issues came from the Vietnam War's devastating effects of napalm and Agent Orange on its local environment and people. Vietnam is the largest exporter of black pepper and cashews and the second largest of coffee behind Brazil. Pham Tuan was an aviator for Vietnam and became the first Asian to ever fly in space aboard the Soviet Soyuz 37 mission. This is the 20th century history of Vietnam. In the next episode, I will get into the Comanches and Comancheria.